Good evening and good morning or good afternoon to all of our friends from around the world. Thank you so much for joining us for our first Indigo Talk of 2023. And we are so excited to see so many participants already tuned in and more are signing on as we speak. So hello and welcome everyone. Though we can't see each other through the Zoom screen, it's so wonderful to be here with each and every one of you. Welcome again. To introduce myself, my name is Henri, and I am the Outreach Manager here at the Ikeda Center, and I will be the moderator for today's talk. And so for our new friends who are joining an Ikeda Center event for the first time, first of all, welcome. And I thought I'd start out by sharing a little bit about our work and mission. So our center was founded in 1993 by Daisaku Ikeda, who is a peace builder, writer, educator, and Buddhist thinker. Mr. Ikeda was a teenager when Japan entered World War II, and he experienced firsthand the sufferings and tragedies of war, including the loss of his own brother. Since that time, he has dedicated his life to the pursuit of peace, establishing several international institutions focused on promoting peace, culture, and education, as well as the Soka school system. He has also engaged in heart-to-heart dialogue with thousands of world leaders, peace builders, and ordinary citizens. After his second lecture at Harvard University in 1993, he established the Ikeda Center with the hopes that it would be a spiritual sanctuary where people, in his words, quote, can come to heal the wounds of the alienated lesser self and open pathways to their true self, the greater self. His tireless commitment to peace inspires and informs all of our programs and publications, which include the development of multi-author books examining issues in peace, learning, and dialogue, a fellowship program to advance research in Ikeda Soka studies, an annual forum for intercultural dialogue, a bi-monthly dialogue event for students and young professionals, and this Indigo Talk series, which we launched in 2021. Named after the Buddhist expression, from the indigo in even deeper blue, this lecture series features renowned scholars in dialogue with enduring works by Mr. Ikeda. Just as items repeatedly dyed with indigo turn bluer than the indigo itself, the Chinese allegory of the indigo plant exemplifies the impact learning has on deepening one's wisdom, courage, and compassion. Today, we are so pleased and honored to have Dr. Zeena Zakharia as our Indigo Talk speaker. Dr. Zeena Zakharia is Assistant Professor of International Education Policy at the University of Maryland at College Park. Her research examines education in context of conflict and advances a critical approach to refugee studies in the Middle East. These interests stem from over 2 decades of educational research, teaching, and school leadership in war-affected contexts. She was a Twainee Fellow at the Carr Center for Human Rights Policy at Harvard's John F. Kennedy School of Government and a Middle Eastern Studies postdoctoral fellow at Columbia University. We have truly enjoyed every opportunity we've had to engage in dialogues with her, and we are very excited for her talk tonight titled Ordinary Solidarities and the Restoration of Humanity. In her presentation, she will explore resonances between her important work and Daisaku Ikeda's philosophy of peace. As this year is the 30th anniversary of the establishment of the Ikeda Center, which was founded shortly after Mr. Ikeda gave his second talk at Harvard titled Mahayana Buddhism and 21st Century Civilization, she will be engaging specifically with this piece. We will also have an opportunity to engage in dialogue with Dr. Zakharia after her presentation, so if you have any questions for her, please utilize the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit your questions at any time throughout the event. We will address those a bit later in the agenda. But before we jump into the talk, we would love to hear from all of you first. So we have an icebreaker question that we'd like each of you to think about and answer through this interactive platform. So my colleague Priandra will be posting a link to our Padlet board in the chat. So please click on that bit.ly link right there with the Indigo Talk 23 link. And we will also have a QR code if you would like to switch to your phone to submit a response. So here is the Padlet board, and once you are on it, please think about this question that's at the top of the Padlet. What word or phrase comes to mind when you think about solidarity? So to add to the board, you can click on the plus sign in the lime green circle there at the bottom of the screen, and then you can type in your word or phrase that comes to mind when you think about solidarity. And if you'd like to add a picture or a GIF, you're welcome to include those as well. And we'll wait a couple seconds for your responses to come through. If you're on your laptop, please also feel free to double click on any part of the screen and you should see a pop-up come up. Hopefully everyone's able to access that. So what word or phrase comes to mind when you think about solidarity? And again, just click on the plus sign there with the circle. Hopefully folks are able to get into the Padlet. Oh, I see. There's so many responses coming in. So maybe I can read. So we have empathy, shared humanity, mutual understanding, belonging, unity, ally, compassion, necessary, to but not to, connection, friendship, understanding, solidarity across nations and identities. Wow, I love this connection photo as well. Understanding, reading. Reading imparts a sense of solidarity and solitude across time and cultures. Wow, wonderful. Togetherness, meshed, peace. Wow, thank you so much, everyone, for participating. It's always so wonderful to be able to hear what everyone is thinking about in regards to our theme. So thank you very much. We'll definitely love to compile like a word cloud with all of these. So this is really wonderful and really gives us a great start to our event. So thank you so much for participating. And following that great icebreaker, up next, I would like to invite Dr. Zeena Zakharia to join us on the screen to give tonight's Indigo Talk. Thank you, Zeena.
Thank you, Anne-Marie, for the introduction. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm really grateful for this invitation to share insights from my work on refugee education, and it's really a distinct pleasure to have this opportunity to bring that work in conversation with Daisaku Ikeda's philosophy of peace as reflected in his 1993 Harvard lecture, as well as his annual peace proposals. The lecture helped to establish the Ikeda Center in Cambridge 30 years ago. And so this is also an opportunity for us to celebrate the tireless work of the center to advance dialogue and mutual understanding, reverence for the sanctity of life, and awareness of our interdependence. In this talk, I explore some of the resonances between Mr. Ikeda's writings and my own observations of what I call ordinary solidarities from research conducted with refugee communities over the last decade. In particular, I consider how one ordinary school in a refugee hostile transit country secured and protected the right to education for refugee children within a significant broader context of multiple compounding crises. I use the notion of ordinary solidarities to describe the school's practices and to explore what that might teach us about global humanitarian work and our own inner work toward the restoration of humanity. As a starting point, I draw on excerpts from a poem entitled Home by Somali British writer and poet Warsan Shire. She reminds us that no one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. You only run for the border when you see the whole city running as well. You have to understand that no one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. No one spends days and nights in the stomach of a truck feeding on newspaper unless the miles traveled means something more than the journey. And yet, there were an estimated 89.3 million forcibly displaced people at the end of 2021, constituting the largest number of forcibly displaced people in history, and more than double the number just a decade ago. People seeking refuge cross physical geographies, seas, deserts, jungles, and airways, and they cross emotional geographies. and the media images that depict them evoke fear, disgust, pity, and other complex emotions. People on the move are met physically with armies, fences, walls, and politically by continental policies of containment, nationalist ideologies that are concerned about preserving national culture, the politics of authoritarianism, and a wider anti-migrant sentiment across the world. These issues converge in schools, where young people move from the extraordinary context of violent conflict and forced displacement to the ordinary violences of everyday schooling. My interest in these issues emerges from scholarly, professional, and personal concerns. As an educator and researcher in conflict-affected contexts spanning almost 30 years, and from my own experience of displacement due to conflict, my elite university training in the United States, my facility in English, and my privileges as a light-skinned person of color in the context of the global North have also advanced my career and facilitated my access to global education policy circles, where I have witnessed firsthand the imposition of Northern authority through my professional service to global and Middle East regional working groups, expert panels, and policy forums. In this way, my understanding of refugee education has been shaped by complex and contradictory formations, effects including of war, forced migration, and discrimination, but as well, immense privilege brought through my education. And so my observations and remarks about ordinary solidarities as a counterpoint to the critiques of global humanitarian intervention are necessarily informed by deep knowledge born of professional and personal experience. Over the last 2 decades, the widespread endorsement of education as a universal human right has given rise to a burgeoning field of global engagement in education in emergencies that includes refugee education. Following calls for education for all and growing recognition that the right to education should extend to children in contexts of conflict, forced migration, and disaster, education was established as a pillar of humanitarian aid and integral to the international humanitarian response system. The global architecture seeks to ensure that all children receive a quality education as articulated most recently in the UN Sustainable Development Goals and numerous previous international declarations, frameworks, and legal instruments. While this might be viewed as a noble aspiration, there has been increasing criticism of the global education architecture and ways of working. Critics point out that within the system, actors and organizations based in the global North, such as the United Nations agencies, multilateral banks, high-income country donors, and international non-governmental organizations hold the most power over decision-making in education policy, finance, and programming. Whereas actors and organizations based in the global South, including refugee communities and other recipients of foreign aid, remain in the least influential positions over issues that affect their lives. Critics assert that inequitable relationships in rights-based interventions reflect colonial inheritances, structural dynamics, and deficit views about local actors and affected communities, who are commonly portrayed as lacking capacity, agency, credibility, relevant skills, and knowledge. Also, critics cite saviorism as a pervasive orientation reproduced through paternalistic relationships that cast local and refugee actors as objects of rescue. Critics also point out that aid interventions reinscribe the authority of Northern experts while undermining local and indigenous knowledges. So growing attention to these power imbalances in recent years has led people to question, how can partnerships that support the right to education not perpetuate these kinds of global inequities? In particular, the confluence of the COVID-19 pandemic and the intensification of the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020 advanced some very important conversations about long-standing issues linked to racism and coloniality in global education spaces. Refugees are a recurring concern in Daisaku Ikeda's peace proposals based on a conviction that no one, wherever they may have been born or whatever group they belong to, should be subjected to discrimination, exploited, or have their interests sacrificed for the benefit of others. He specifically references the importance of expanding educational opportunities for refugee youth and notes that it is crucial to search for means to counteract the drift towards xenophobia and to rehumanize the discourse around migrant and refugee populations. Across his writings, Mr. Ikeda moves between addressing global humanitarian systems and structures for peace, the efforts of individuals and collectives, everyday citizens, and the enduring work of inner transformation, noting that the message is always one of human restoration. By asserting that the spiritual wellsprings, and I quote, to support refugee efforts can be found in living traditions around the world, and that, quote, the key to dealing with even the most seemingly intractable challenges is to be found when people come together, unquote. Ikeda reminds us of the interconnection among global structures, civil society, and individuals, and the deep human dimension that animates all of our work. My focus in this talk is on the work of everyday school actors in this middle layer of individuals and collectives who, in their embodiment of ordinary solidarity, speak to the system and to our own roles. In 2011, the war in Syria initiated mass displacement on an unprecedented scale. An estimated 5.6 million Syrians sought refuge in neighboring countries, including 1.5 million in Lebanon, a lower income country with the largest per capita refugee population in the world. A combination of forces, including a northern thrust to prevent migrants from reaching Europe, as well as the sheer scale of an estimated 1.2 million school-age Syrian refugees across Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and Egypt, catalyzed a proliferation of partnership-based interventions aimed at protecting the right to education. Now, from the outset, government and society in Lebanon were deeply divided over the Syria crisis and consequently assistance to refugees. Tensions were linked to perceptions among the Lebanese that Syrians pose an economic, physical, and symbolic threat. Also, there's a historical context of political involvement and occupation of Lebanon by Syria. And finally, a hostile policy context that does not fully recognize the status and rights of refugees. The situation led to explicit acts of discrimination, stereotyping, scapegoating, and violence against Syrian refugees. These tensions were felt keenly in schools where poor young people are subjected to various forms of discrimination, physical violence, and verbal abuse from Lebanese teachers, students, bus drivers, and host communities in schools' vicinities, leading Syrians to drop out of school. Attempts by refugee and everyday citizens to uphold the right to education for Syrian refugees in Lebanon has taken place within a significant larger context of multiple compounding crises in recent years, including state fragility, political unrest, financial crisis, COVID-19, and a massive explosion in Beirut port that wrought human devastation and damage to infrastructure vital to economic recovery, service delivery, and education. Deteriorating conditions for all have increased anti-refugee sentiments and affected the ability of schools to function. It's against this backdrop that one private, nonprofit, faith-based school, which I refer to as Our Faith School, sought to support Syrian refugee students. Our Faith School was a small school in Beirut with a diverse population of learners in grades K through 9, including Syrian refugee students integrated across its classrooms. The dingy concrete facade belied a child-friendly school with a brightly painted walls. The sunlit hallways and classroom doors were lined with student work, and from the ceiling hung decorations in celebration of the upcoming winter holidays. Backpacks hung on hooks and in cubbies, and posters reminded students of their values of kindness and care. During my visit, I noticed the inner courtyard that served as the school's main sports and play area, and that awaited students whose voices could be heard over closed doors. On an upper level, kindergartners joyfully clambered up the stairs for playtime in another covered open-air playground. And as they made their way, they counted the steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, following their teacher. The dean pointed out 2 Syrian students who, like the other children, smiled and greeted the dean along their way. On entering the fake grass-covered space, they scrambled to take turns on the small slides at the far end of the play area. Our faith school enrolled students from diverse backgrounds, reflecting its neighborhood. Only half were Lebanese citizens, and the other half came from other backgrounds, including Syrians, Kurds, Armenians, and displaced Iraqis. The school also enrolled the children of domestic workers, and this level of integration of diverse religions, nationalities, socioeconomic groups was really atypical for a Lebanese private school. The school also exhibited racial and ethnic diversity. As a neighborhood school in an impoverished area, the school had always enrolled economically vulnerable students, with most students paying partial tuition and some paying none. The dean noted, "We don't send kids home. We try to keep them." After 2012, the population of school-aged children from Syria increased dramatically in the neighborhood of the school, with hundreds of thousands of refugees coming in. Many of the kids could not find a school, and so the enrollment of refugees at OFS occurred organically. It started with a few families from the church who were Syrians, and then they couldn't find a school for their kids, so the church spoke with the school saying, "Can you accept them?" And the school said yes. So International Faith Ministry, a partner of the school, helped to fund the school by supporting the tuition fees of 25 Syrian students initially. And that's how it started, says the dean. A year later, another partner, Iman Lebanon, initiated a non-formal education program at the school as well. We felt obliged to get involved in helping Syrian families who came to Lebanon. We wanted to build a good relationship with them, to accompany them on their journey. The after-school program assisted Syrian students with the transition to formal schools, including our faith school and other schools, and it provided partial tuition to support refugee integration directly into our faith school alongside other students. The number started with just 7 or 8 children, and then slowly but surely it was a flood. So, and I quote, "We didn't sit down and say, we're going to register Syrian kids, but also no one said that we shouldn't. We were worried about the finances because before the crisis, we've never been a wealthy school. We've always struggled to survive year to year. So no one said no, but no one said yes. It just happened really." And in this way, our faith school initiated a refugee education response that expanded over time despite limited resources and to support a growing influx of children. On a kindergarten classroom door, it read, "Welcome to kindergarten." And a snow scene with cotton balls glued to blue construction paper greeted the students alongside green pine trees decorated with red pom-poms. Inside the classroom, children sat around a rectangular table, busy in the learning activity with their teacher, who sat at the table with them, interacting with each child. All of the children appeared to be engaged in the activity, animated, moving in their seats, laughing and talking with each other and with the teacher, as one might expect in any classroom. Our faith school's partnerships appeared to have a positive impact on Syrian students' academic and social integration into that school community. The partnerships ensured that Syrian students would enroll and remain supported financially, and removed a significant barrier to integration. The partnerships also supported the enrollment of students through referral and tuition contributions, and it provided academic support and follow-up through the afternoon program. With measures of support taken at the school in communication with parents, school staff, and with the partners, Syrian students remained in school. The dean remarked, quote, "I can't think of anyone who has dropped out," unquote. And teachers noted that students made remarkable strides because of school supports, including concerted efforts to understand the situation of each student by meeting the families so that they could learn more about their situation and not just their economic situation. The dean described their approach to integrating refugee students and families as simply being inclusive of everyone. "We never devised a system for the Syrian parents. The school system applies to everyone," said the dean. For example, the school met regularly with all parents and had a part-time psychologist who supported all the students. The school also had a parent committee, a group of parents who met to provide input on school decisions and supported school activities. That year, the parent body elected both Lebanese and Syrian officers to lead it. The dean observed that this was a positive sign of Syrian families being integrated into the school. Our faith schools, teachers, and staff described relationships within the school and with Iman Lebanon as being like a family. One teacher described the relationships this way, and I quote, "I know each one cares about the students. In my first year, I noticed that even in the teacher room, there was a sense of closeness to each other, like a family. Teachers play sports and games with students and run activities outside the school for them. And the way they give importance to each student, other schools, they don't have it." And this was from a science teacher. These relationships were observable in the ways that school staff greeted one another, dropped in on the dean to discuss issues, and spoke with students in the schoolyard. Students high-fived the dean, who addressed each student by name and asked how they were doing. And the dean's office itself was central and had an open door so that anyone, teachers, staff, students, could pop their head in. And they did. The atmosphere appeared collegial and non-hierarchical, or at least not overtly so, supporting what people told us in interviews about family-like relationships within the school community. And in particular, the respectful relationship between the dean, the custodial staff member who came in when I was chatting with the dean, and who cracked a joke while extending herself to offer a cup of coffee. It signified an atmosphere of kindness and care and an attitude of non-discrimination. Our conversation in the glass office was interrupted by a teacher who accompanied two teenage boys out of class. She said, "I will not have them back until they learn their manners." The dean excused himself and stepped out. The boys had been misbehaving in class, and the dean spoke to them in the hallway in a manner that evoked kindness, asking for their perspective on what happened in school, in the classroom. And they claimed that the lesson was boring. The dean asked them to consider the effort that the teacher was making to teach them, and that they might express their feedback politely to the teacher. He accompanied them back to their classroom where they apologized to the teacher. And before she could accept, the school bell rang for lunch. Students streamed out of their classrooms and animatedly made their way down the stairs to the courtyard. And as they passed the dean on the stairs, they greeted and high-fived him. He spoke to each of them by name and asked how they were doing, and they skipped down the stairs and sat or stood in groups in the courtyard, eating their sandwiches. The dean remarked, "See how they are in the courtyard? There's no child standing alone or left out. You can't tell who is Syrian or who is Lebanese or anyone else. They're just together as children." And in the courtyard, the student population appeared visibly diverse, with Black African, South Asian, and Southeast Asian students among its largely Arab student body. All the students interacted with the dean on the stairs and with other children in the courtyard, suggesting that students were well integrated into school life. However, the integration of Syrian students and families was not without its difficulties. The dean cautioned that their integration into school life should not be taken as a sign that students were accepted or integrated into the wider community. Some parents did not want their children in class with Syrian students, and they removed their children from the school. The school did not bow to this pressure, despite its financial vulnerability, even though fee-paying students and families left the school because of its policy of integrating Syrian students. The school continued to receive and support Syrian refugees. Our faith school also actively sought to mitigate discrimination against refugee students through its equity-oriented tuition practices and integration into all facets of school life, including addressing issues with students and parents within school community. How do we go about doing this? Solving the challenge of community discrimination against Syrian students? We phrase our rules in terms of being a loving community, being a respectful community to each other, regardless of what's happening outside the school. In reflecting on wider political tensions affecting the community and the school's approach to mitigating them, Old Faith School's dean concluded, we don't have a big strategy. We just try to encourage people to accept each other. Lebanon's crises deeply impacted our faith school, its community, and its partnerships. By December of 2019, the school's financial vulnerability had already been magnified by a deepening economic crisis. Quote, people struggled with finances and they were unable to pay their tuition fees, the principal told us. Despite being tuition dependent, Old Faith School did not ask students to leave because of unpaid fees. In August 2020, the explosion in Beirut port damaged the school and directly impacted families who lost their homes, their jobs, their shops, that were all in the area. Many families were severely struggling. Still, the school called upon parents at the beginning of the school year to ask them to bring their children to school. Even if they could not pay, said the principal, we did not want any child to stay at home because of money reasons. Old Faith School reached out to International Faith Ministry for more financial support. And I quote, this was the first time we asked for straight up fund donations, saying, we don't want scholarships, we want you to give us money just to survive. The crises brought the school community together. After the Beirut port explosion, the principal explained, we asked the parents who had suffered damages to their home or shops if they needed any help. There were a lot of groups that started helping and cleaning debris from the blast, and some families were unable to repair glass or aluminum. So we contacted people who helped with that and with carpentry. Old Faith School hosted a 5-day mobile clinic in collaboration with 2 faith-based charities. And the devastating impact of Lebanon's crises helped to expand their work and created a new sense of empathy among Lebanese families for their Syrian counterparts. As the situation continued to deteriorate, Old Faith School persisted in serving students, both Syrian and Lebanese. We have a lot of people who are in need now, and the main difference is that there are more Lebanese students in need than before. With the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic and the initial depreciation of the Lebanese lira, Old Faith School reduced teacher salaries to 75%. Still, they kept going. They persisted in supporting refugee students through various means, identifying new sponsors and organizing fundraising events. Because we want to help our families, the principal explained. The political crisis and COVID-19 pandemic also resulted in multiple forced closures. According to the dean, quote, teaching became harder. We closed for many consecutive days due to protests. And with the coronavirus, we closed for many more days. And then we had to go online completely. So like other schools, Old Faith School transitioned to online learning in a context where few students and teachers had the required technology, connectivity, or even know-how. Many of our students are refugees with no access to Wi-Fi, or they don't have a smart pad or laptop in some cases. The family just has one phone. So this makes online teaching more challenging. The school adjusted to support them nonetheless, delivering teaching via WhatsApp. The pivot to virtual learning, while challenging and not without problems, was done quickly and flexibly and with kindness and humor. Here are just some examples from virtual observations. They're screenshots of lessons created and held via WhatsApp. In the last image, you can see the students laughing at a voice comment made by the teacher. And, from one of our observations on the last day of a science class, the teacher greeted the students and the students greeted the teacher back. And one student texted, "Bye, mister, we're gonna miss you. I don't know how I'm gonna live or spend my summer without sciences." And then the string of emojis. So despite technical difficulties, a majority of students participated in every session, showing an ability to retain students even in the most challenging circumstances. Our WhatsApp observations supported what teachers and administrators said in interviews about the positive nature of teacher and student relationships and the ways that teachers engaged all students, regardless of their background. The use of humor and lighthearted exchanges was observed through teacher texts and voice notes and student responses, as illustrated in strings of laughing emojis and texts representing laughter. In the face of extreme difficulties posed by multiple compounding crises, teachers at Old Faith School persisted in their teaching and upheld their partnerships to support Syrian students in an integrated environment. So I suggest the notion of ordinary solidarity to capture how the school sustained the right to education for refugees. Bajaj and Toe describe solidarity as a relationship that challenges inequities, injustice, and colonialism as part of the daily practice of an engaged community grounded in a concrete sense of justice. And they note that solidarity requires a relinquishing of privileges on the part of its members. Based on this notion, I suggest that the school exhibited what might be called ordinary solidarity, working with refugee students and their families. They practiced this solidarity through their organic responsiveness, through equitable relationships, and the principles of inclusion and anti-discrimination. So through an orientation of, that's just what we do, the partners supported each other and worked towards refugee rights, guided by what they viewed as everyday principles of care and respect. Just a loving community. The school had trusting and equitable relationships with its partners, and because of this trust, the partnerships too developed organically to support Syrian students as an extension of existing work with vulnerable populations. It was never planned, it just happened, really. Their efforts were responsive and they were characterized by equity, inclusion, and anti-discrimination. And so the school confronted discrimination through its practices, and despite its financial precarity, it did not bow to members of the community demanding the exclusion of Syrians from the school. CARE guided the work of the school and partners and provided accountability for the work. And there was no big strategy. We just try to encourage people to accept each other and, quote, provide a good education. In this way, our faith school and their partners enacted ordinary solidarity as part of the daily practice of an engaged community, challenging inequality and injustice through their refugee education response. So ordinary solidarity emerges as a counterpoint to global interventions in refugee education, which have been critiqued for dictating education responses, maintaining inequitable relationships, and even sustaining discriminatory practices. Common approaches to refugee education often derive from a place of benevolence or charity that risks embodying saviorism and reinscribes deficit perspectives of local and refugee communities. These motivations also tend to center the epistemic authority, egoism, and needs of those providing aid rather than refugees and local partners, people with struggles, but also knowledge, agency, and capabilities. Our faith school's example suggests that ordinary solidarities demand a shift in orientation from saviorism to care, which derives from a degree of vulnerability through which partners come to know one another's struggles, needs, and desires. Importantly, care sustains solidarity through crises. It fosters empathy, and it reduces the risk of discrimination among partners. This shift in turn counters racism and coloniality in humanitarian relations. Ordinary solidarity thus emerges as an anti-colonial mandate for rights-based interventions characterized by organic responsiveness, equitable relationships, and the principles of inclusion and anti-discrimination. The principles of ordinary solidarity are also suggestive of the inner transformation required of this work, deepening our sense of interdependence and our compassion and care for others. In his 1993 lecture, Mr. Ikeda refers to what Shakyamuni describes as, quote, a single invisible arrow piercing the hearts of people, unquote, or what might be understood as the arrow of a discriminatory consciousness, an unreasoning emphasis on difference or attachment to difference. He suggests that the invisible arrow, and I quote, is not to be found in races or classes external to ourselves, but embedded in our own heart. The conquest of our own prejudicial thinking, our own attachment to difference, is the guiding principle for open dialogue, the essential condition for the establishment of peace and universal respect for human rights. His is a message of solidarity, peace, and human restoration. And so through a deepened understanding of our dynamic interdependence, working against the invisible arrow and acting from our true self, our greater self, we might reorient humanitarian relationships into ordinary global solidarities, and in turn move the world and ourselves toward restoration of humanity. I want to express my gratitude to a number of people who helped me to develop my thinking across all these layers, including Francine Menashe and Maha Shaib for their partnership and support over the life of this project, Samira Shatila, Ala Al-Samhouri, and Langdon Courtney for their research assistance, and Old Faith School and their partners who allowed us to learn from their work through much hardship. I also want to thank Jason Gula and all of our friends at the Ikeda Center, Kevin, Lillian, Henri, and Priandra, for engaging me in the writings of Daisaku Ikeda, for engaging me in dialogue, and for your friendship and support for this talk. Thank you to all for being here, and I welcome your questions. If you'd like to learn more about the research, please visit our website, which has additional resources around this work. And thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much, Zeena, for that really wonderful and thought-provoking talk tonight. It's such an honor to be able to hear about all of your research and the incredible school leaders really that you were working with, and just how this community really came together. So thank you so much. I'm sure everybody is still milling their thoughts around everything that you shared. And we did have a couple of questions come in. So we have about 20 minutes for Q&A. I know you didn't see all of them come through, but we have many questions. And thank you so much to our attendees for your curiosity and open hearts to have these questions. And we may not get to every single one, but hopefully some of the questions we go over will cover many of the questions. So for our first one, Zeena, we have: an important and holistic way to help a child's learning is by structuring a child's environment to support the learning process that starts at school and continues at home. However, if there is a conflict between what they learn at home and school, how do you avoid disruption in a child's ability to learn?
So I'm not sure, the nature of the conflict that we're referring to But this particular school really extended itself to the families. It sought to understand the families and how how they nurtured their children, and what their particular needs were. And in this way, and in understanding the difficulties of the families, the school was able to try to bridge some of those. And they were working in partnership with others. So they used the resources of a whole community, really, to be able to bridge some of that. It is possible that at times parents, may have other ideas for the education of their own children, and it's only really through dialogue and mutual learning that schools can begin to, support families in their own educational role, and that families can support schools in their roles. So I think there's a mutual relationship that has to be established there, in order for both to learn from one another.
Thank you, Zeena. Yes, I also really loved the emphasis that you shared about how, the school community became like a family-like atmosphere, that, that it was really their education in school was really like an extension of their family. So just seeing how those relationships developed, and how important that was to see for the children to be able to see an example of how to get along with one another and really be supportive. So thank you for that response. And our second one is, what do you think was the main motivating or unifying factor for these school leaders to continue accepting Syrian students into the school despite financial obstacles and opposition from communities?
Yeah, that continued support was really remarkable, especially at one point, when one of the partners pulled out, saying that they couldn't anymore support their own partnership with the school to support the students. But according to the school actors I spoke to, they just felt that that was a commitment that they had to make to their fellow, to their fellow human beings, right? The children were in the community, and as a community school, they felt they needed to serve the entire community, and that they couldn't choose who to support and who not to support. Making those kinds of distinctions was problematic in their view. And it came from an inner and deeper understanding about their role as a school and as school actors. And so because of this, they continued to persist. And they spoke quite openly about those difficulties and what it really meant to continue to push up against the kind of discrimination against the populations that were, they came in stages, right? When we're talking over multiple years, they came in stages and began to live around the school and within the school community. Yeah, so this inner, deeper understanding of their interconnection and their interdependence with their community, and the need to support that community during their time of need.
Thank you so much, Zeena. I love the one word that really stood out to me in your response was really this commitment that they had decided, this is how this is what we have to do, and just being able to forge ahead and finding a solution rather than wavering on what they needed to do. So that's really great. So we have another question. What lessons do you think are most important for humanitarian aid organizations to learn from the example of the school?
Well, I think it's a lot of, sort of these three areas that I mentioned. For one thing, the school was organically responsive. So it didn't try to create some kind of program outside of what it already did, right? And it did the response evolved as the needs of this dynamic community also evolved. And so you often what we see with international aid organizations is that the systems and plans for the intervention are set in advance, often without the involvement of the community, that is to receive that aid. And then being set in advance, it is often static. And the way the aid structure works is that it's very difficult to be flexible and organically shift and to see that population as having dynamic needs. Of course, the context is dynamic as well. And so international humanitarian organizations need to be able to also be flexible and to evolve with the changing situation. So that is one area. The other is to really do a clear check of the kinds of discriminatory orientations that may enter into the work. And these are sometimes in clear policies that are established through sort of racialized practices of institutions, through a sort of given understanding that international organizations maybe know more or know better for the communities that they're seeking to aid. I mean, this school did not do that. They never claimed to know more. They never claimed that that there was a given intervention and that would be what these young people would get and what they deserved. Those kinds of discourses that we sometimes see in international aid, policy outputs, even just conversations or around policy tables, were never there. So really thinking about racist and discriminatory practices is extremely important. And that happens across so many different areas, even the way we think about what knowledge counts. And then, these kinds of transformations really require this kind of inward looking eye that we all need to continually engage in, right? This is something that we all need to do across our lifespan, and that Ikeda's lecture, as well as across his writings, he talks so clearly and deeply about. So the need to continually also just reflect on our work, the inner work and the outer work that we do, and how these interconnect and how we can bring them in greater alignment with these larger goals of restoring humanity.
Wow, thank you, Zeena. I was thinking, yeah, that kind of ties into our next one about really being able to self-reflect and just the influence of, I'll just read it out loud. So the question is, how did faith at this school influence the warm atmosphere at the school?
That is a great question. And I admit that, when we were visiting the school, when I visited over multiple years, and it hadn't really occurred to me to actually explore this particular area. So when I think about sort of the data that I have from the research, we never directly discussed faith. So religion and faith never entered into the conversation. However, in reanalyzing the data, particularly in moving between the data and between Ikeda's own works around this inner transformation, and Ikeda also talks a lot about faith communities as having sort of inner, wellspring, a deep place that that allows us to extend to others in ways that otherwise might not be possible. It occurred to me that although they never discussed it, my sense is that a lot of that came from a deep faith or a deep understanding from the practices of faith. That is not to say that one must be attuned to a particular religion in order to access that deeper self-knowledge. We can access that inner wellspring through a number of different practices. And Ikeda's work provides one avenue, right? By helping us, guiding us through Buddhist thought on that inner source of strength. But interestingly, it is the same inner strength, I believe, that allowed the actors in the school to persist in the face of so much adversity and really tragedy.
Thank you, Zeena. That's really interesting that it didn't come up explicitly, but you definitely felt that, in the actions and the, just the way that, the behavior was being shown in the action.
So the expressions of, a loving community, that comes from somewhere very, what does that really mean to extend oneself as a loving community? How do we bring that into practice? Yes, through the data, we can say, okay, they did this, they did this, they did this. But in their own explanations, this was just sort of a deep knowledge, just extending of the community to a broader community through love.
This next question is how are the students doing now after the pandemic, and do they have any mental health challenges?
What a great question. I don't know how they're doing now in 2023. My last contact with the school was in 2021. And at that time, they were, continuing to move along. However, since 2021, the broader context of Lebanon has deteriorated significantly. And so I imagine the entire school community, as well as the entire country, have been challenged with a kind of deterioration that I think very few people experience in their lifetime. And so I imagine that they are facing tremendous difficulties. And as I was preparing for this talk, I was actually reflecting on the same and thinking, whether I would be able to reconnect and sort of see how they're doing now. As you might imagine, the past few years, since 2019 until now, have been extremely difficult for so many people. And with the compounding crises, and then this very sheer drop in political and economic conditions, it's kind of hard to imagine where the floor is right now.
Well, thank you for sharing, Zeena. As you responded to that, it reminded me of Mr. Ikeda's 2022 peace proposal, and where he had shared about how, with the many, many challenges that are coming up in society and that we face and grapple with as humanity, he was sharing how, it was kind of like the pandemic really became like an X-ray of really uncovering all of the human suffering. But then he said this quote, most crucial is to forge bonds of solidarity from the realizations of connectedness that have come to us deeply and intensely during this unprecedented crisis, and make these the basis for shared efforts to find a way out of the storm. So I felt like reading, just your your article and also hearing your talk today that it's such a wonderful example to read, to be able to continue to have hope and try to move forward even in these really dire situations. So I think this will be such an important example to really come back to in order for people to regain hope.
Yes.
Yes. We have another question. It's, did the students and staff speak a common language? If not, how was this dealt with?
That's a great question. Yes, they spoke, yes, to an extent, they spoke common language. The Arabic, the common language is Arabic. So Syrians, speak Arabic. Most Syrians speak Arabic, I should say, because there is linguistic diversity in Syria as well. At this particular school, they were operating the Lebanese national curriculum, which is required. But the curriculum itself is in English and Arabic, or in French and Arabic, depending on what school you're in. So for this particular school, it was in English and in Arabic. So that was part of what the partners were doing to help students transition into the school, that school, and into other schools as well, was to try to bring the sort of bilingual abilities of the children up to the academic level that was required for education. So this was extremely difficult, particularly for students who were in middle school, because the Syrian curriculum does not do this. So children were, among the difficulties facing Syrian children in Lebanon has been to face this linguistic difference in the curriculum, which this particular school aimed to bridge by having these additional classes that young people would come through, and once they've established themselves, they would then transition into the classrooms with the other students. I mean, basically having that sort of backup support. But in other things, they had a common language.
Thank you. Wow, I really appreciate that question too, because it was a layer that I wasn't, thinking about, and just thinking about more the situation of the students and the teachers who are really, just trying to bring everybody together. But I also love that, there's a common language that, is not just in words, but other ways that, you can communicate from the heart. I think we have maybe one last question. Let me try to see if I can pull it up here. So, yes. So question is, is musicking a part of the curriculum? And if so, how was this done, considering the diversity of the students' backgrounds?
I don't know. I don't know whether that's part of the curriculum, and that's a great question. It would have been wonderful to learn more about what they do, how they do this across the curriculum. Yeah,
another interesting question and perspective to bring in. Yes, here's another one. Why was it named Our Faith School?
Well, that's my name for it. So in order to protect the participants and the school itself, as well as the partners, I use the pseudonym Our Faith School to try to, sort of mark it as a faith community. And so also when I say International Faith Ministry, I just mean it's an international organization that is an extension. It's part of the ministry of the same faith. And Iman Lebanon, Iman means faith in Arabic. So that's the local chapter who also, they were a local organization who also supported the school. And in this way, the three partners work together as equal partners. And so I just use that as a pseudonym, or I use pseudonyms.
Got it. Wow, that's a great fun fact. Yeah, so that kind of brings us to the end of our Q&A, but Zeena, if there's anything you haven't been able to share yet, or any concluding thoughts before we move into the next item.
Sure. I see one more question I just opened the Q&A about participation from Jewish populations. And that's a really interesting question. If so, how are they integrated into social and religious programs? So yes, Lebanon has historically and in contemporary, they have Jewish populations, of course, fewer than in the past, but and as well among the refugees, there are Jewish populations. So not just Jewish populations that have lived in Lebanon for a long time, but also among the various refugee populations that have come to Lebanon over time. In this particular school, the populations were just integrated regardless of their religious backgrounds. I mean, the school itself had also, it followed a Christian faith. However, it had students, the majority of students were Muslim at the school. So that is not uncommon in Lebanon. Many schools that were founded based on Christian missions have majority Muslim populations and other populations. And there are many represented sects in Lebanon of the multiple faiths, not just Islam, but Christianity, Judaism, and other faiths. And so the Baha'i, for example, a good Baha'i population as well. And they're integrated into programs as other students are.
Thank you so much, Zeena. It's been such a great honor to be able to hear you speak today, and we're so grateful for the time together. And this brings us to close to the end of our event. But our final agenda item, we have our Executive Director, Kevin Marr, to share some closing reflections. So I'll introduce Kevin.
Thank you so much. Henri, can you hear me okay? Great. So good evening and good morning to all of our participants joining us from many time zones and locations for tonight's Indigo Talk. On behalf of the entire Ikeda Center staff, I want to express my deepest appreciation to Dr. Zeena Zakharia for your thought-provoking and timely talk this evening. Many months ago, when the staff began brainstorming on potential speakers for tonight's event, your name immediately came to mind, and we were thrilled when you accepted our invitation. And as a scholar who embodies a commitment to peace and human dignity in both your teaching and peace building, your work is both inspiring and important at this critical time. And thank you as well to our participants. I know we had over 100 at one point who joined from at least 6 countries around the world. And some of you are joining either very late in the evening or for others is quite early in the morning. And we're deeply appreciative that you joined us for this event and for your thoughtful questions and reflections on the theme of solidarity and human restoration. There were more questions that we could get to than we had time for. And thank you all so much for your wonderful comments and questions. I also want to express boundless gratitude to my colleagues, Lillian, Henri, and Prianja for your tremendous efforts in organizing this wonderful event. I was reflecting on our experiences with Dr. Zakharia and remembered that we had first met back in 2015 at an education conference. And then a few years later, we had the opportunity and the real pleasure to collaborate together along with peace education pioneer, Dr. Betty Reardon, and some Boston area undergraduate students on a seminar series examining the growing threat of nuclear weapons and what actions that we can take as ordinary individuals toward nuclear abolition. It was a wonderful 2-part seminar series that culminated in a public event. And in the years following, we've had tremendously inspiring and moving and meaningful dialogues with Zeena, both in organized seminars as well as in informal Zoom meetings on the role of human dignity in fostering peace and how to generate hope and joy at times of crisis. And in all of these exchanges, we've been reminded of the tremendous power of dialogue that is grounded in action. And so we feel deep gratitude for every opportunity to engage with you and for all that we've learned in these sessions about what it means to contribute to peace in our own contexts and communities. And resonating with Zeena's talk tonight, in many of his writings, including in his 40 peace proposals, Mr. Ikeda examines solidarity as a central aspect for addressing global issues and fostering cultures of peace. And one example of this, in his 2020 peace proposal titled Toward Our Shared Future, Constructing an Era of Human Solidarity, he addresses the challenge of the climate crisis through a lens of solidarity, writing, "Because climate change is an issue that will leave no one untouched, it has the potential to catalyze heretofore unseen global solidarity in action." And in another essay, he writes, "The limitless power of the individual is unleashed when we work together. This is the power of connection, the power of human solidarity." In that same essay, he emphasizes, "The solidarity of the world's so-called ordinary citizens holds the key to peace." And this aspect of solidarity being the key to unleashing our innate power and potential is one that I think resonates closely with Dr. Zakharia's talk tonight. For it is in solidarity that we are able to pool our collective wisdom as well as our innate strengths and compassion. And he is emphasizing, Mr. Ikeda is emphasizing the solidarity of ordinary citizens as being critical. And of course, Zeena addresses this in her talk as well. In a joint youth appeal that was written a few years back, that Mr. Ikeda authored with Nobel Peace Prize laureate Adolfo Perez Escoval, they comment that there's no challenge that cannot be resolved if we unite in solidarity. And as Henri was sharing at the beginning of our event, and was also shared in Zeena's presentation, this year marks the 30th anniversary since the founding of our center. And we were established on the same date as Mr. Ikeda's 1993 Harvard address that Zeena engaged with in her talk, Mahayana Buddhism in 21st century civilization, where we examine the key contributions that Buddhism can make toward the peaceful evolution of humanity. In each of our programs this year, we're exploring key themes from this talk, tonight being the restoration of humanity, with a particular focus on what lessons they offer at this critical moment in human history. And as was shared by many of the questions, I too was struck deeply by the moving example of our faith school and how the school leaders responded to a critical need to support the Syrian refugees, students, through an inclusive, integrative, relational approach. I love that comment by the dean that we were just trying to encourage people to respect each other. And also, Zeena, your emphasis on the inner transformation that is required in this work. As you were sharing, I was thinking of these wonderful planning sessions we had leading up to tonight, where we discussed the need of committing to our own inner work while approaching issues of social change. And the connection between human restoration, interdependence, and solidarity was addressed so powerfully in your presentation. So thank you again. And so to conclude, I would like to just share some final reflections from Mr. Ikeda that, again, connect with this theme of human restoration. He writes, "What we need most is to restore and revive our humanity. We must create a society where people can live with dignity, a society where people can live in peace and happiness. It may seem like a long and distant path, but I'm convinced that the 21st century must see a movement to sow the seeds of peace, happiness, and trust in every person's heart, the seeds of a truly humane way of life. I am convinced this is the only path." So thank you again so much for joining us this evening. I hope you all stay safe and stay well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And thank you everyone for being with us tonight for Indigo Talk, and to stay in touch with us. about this event and future events, please follow us on social media at Ikeda Center or visit ikedacenter.org. And we will also be posting a write-up on the event soon, so please stay tuned for that as well. And thank you again, everyone. Please have a good rest of your night.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.